Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use the take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table. Come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. The 2022 NFL regular season is in the books. We have a super wild card weekend that is just 5 days away. Mike Vrabel decided to clean house instead of looking in the mirror. The Cardinals just cleaned house in general, and our Detroit Lions kicked Aaron Rodgers out of the playoffs. It's been a fantastic day and a lot of NFL news going on. Dennis, how are you feeling after last night's victory?
Well, I'm happy that our Detroit Lions did well. So
I adopted them in August. You should be aware about it by now.
No, it would have been nicer if the Seahawks had lost.
Baker, why can't you do us just this one favor?
But I mean, the Lions grew by leaps and bounds over the course of this season. And while it may not make a ton of difference, they've got the early pick from the Rams, and obviously having another earlier pick is better. But getting to the playoffs would have been a monumental feat. And the fact that we made it all the way to the last day and still had a shot until the end of the 4:00 games. It feels good as you've won a Super Bowl as a Broncos fan. I have not as a Lions fan. We rarely make the playoffs, rarely win playoff games. I'm looking forward to next season.
Yeah, I am for Denver too. It's been amazing to see what the team looked like the last 2 weeks with Nathaniel Hackett out. Went from averaging like 15 points a game. The last 2 weeks, they've averaged almost 28 points a game, had a season high 31 yesterday. And I know people are going to say, well, the Chargers didn't have anything to play for. They were playing hard, whether they should have been or not, pretty deep into that game, which is something we'll get a look at. But we are going to go look at the entire Week 18 slate, and that starts with the Kansas City Chiefs locking up home field advantage, or locking up the number 1 seed. It's going to take a lot to get used to that you don't get a home field advantage throughout the playoffs in the AFC. With a 31-13 win over the Raiders on Saturday afternoon. Dennis, a lot of debate preseason about how much Ronald Jones would eat into Clyde Edwards-Hilaire's workload. Turns out neither of them was worth a lot during the fantasy season, but in this final game of the regular season, 10 carries, 45 yards, and an elusive touchdown for Ronald Jones. What do you make of that?
Garbage time hero. I mean, they're so down on Edwards-Helaire. He's on IR. McKinnon and Pacheco have been doing the heavy lifting. McKinnon didn't play much. It looked like they kind of decided to preserve Pacheco some as well. Do you remember Cameron Artis-Payne, the Carolina Panthers? Yeah. He backed up James Stewart, or maybe it was D'Angelo Williams, but he was the direct backup. And as long as the starter was healthy, he was inactive because he was literally a direct replacement for him. but he didn't play special teams, didn't provide anything in the passing game. And it's like, that's what Ronald Jones is. If Pacheco is injured, they're going to play Ronald Jones in that 2-down grinder role, because we've seen enough of Ronald Jones to know dude can't catch the ball and can't protect the quarterback for whatever reason. He just can't. I don't think he's coming back next year. It's going to be somebody's RB 3 or 4 somewhere. Maybe he takes a shine to special teams, but I mean, it doesn't mean anything as far as Kansas City goes. To be honest, they may keep him over Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, CEH. I remember from some people's fantasy 101 and rookie drafts to where he's ended up. It was a day for fantasy zombies because Hunter Renfrow, just to spite me, caught 7 passes for 63 yards and a touchdown. But I want to talk about Jarrett Stidham. We didn't expect a lot, and he went out against San Francisco and had himself a pretty good day, 365 yards, 3 touchdowns. Less great in week 2, 219 touchdown interception, did run for 50 yards on 7 carries. The Raiders pretty well got blown out here. What have you thought of the small sample size from Jarrett Stidham?
So over the last 2 games, he's completed over 64% of his passes, which is pretty good. You'd like 68, 69, nice, 70 to be up there. But in the first game he played, he took 0 sacks. Yesterday he took 6 sacks, and that's a big issue. There was a lot of talk going around Twitter today about sacks being a quarterback stat, because the quarterbacks who take the most sacks, it isn't that they get pressured more, it's that they hold the ball longer, and that leads to more sacks. So there was quite a little debate going on. But Stidham is an unrestricted free agent. He did pass for 584 yards with 4 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. I believe that McDaniels is going to want to try to bring him back as a free agent because he'll be cheap. And he looks now he can be a backup because he knows the system. Now things change. Now there's talk that Las Vegas is going to get Brady. If they bring in Brady, they're running Brady's offense. Now that I think about it, Brady spent a significant number of years with McDaniels.
That would also be Josh McDaniels' offense.
And so it's likely to be the same offense. So
the rumors have been Brady or Jimmy G, and I think either way, you're right. You would want a pretty quality backup that also knows the system, and that was why they got Stidham in the first place, because he came from New England.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said that was why they got Stidham in the first place, because he came from New England, knew the system.
Right. Well, it's clear that Stidham is a backup with the potential to work his way into a starter, a la Matt Schaub. But I don't know that he'll perform as a starter the way that Schaub did in Houston. But he may get that chance if other quarterbacks with any cachet decide, I don't think I really want to go to Las Vegas. You hear the talk about they have cash flow issues, things like that. It's just a situation where they may decide, it doesn't feel good. And so they end up having to go with a tier 2 starter, tier 3 starter, and that would benefit Stidham.
I do like that they still have good weapons, and I think it does make some sense, Josh McDaniels, with wanting to run his system, looking at either Brady or Jimmy G, because both those guys would have had a lot of years on that system. In the other game on Saturday, the Jacksonville Jaguars punched their ticket to the postseason, although it took an awful long time in that game. They get the 20-16 win over the Tennessee Titans. The Titans end up losing 7 straight to close the season. Josh Dobbs did his best. Offensive line crumbled around him quite a bit. We saw a lot of offensive coaches get fired today, including the offensive coordinator, though it looks like Mike Vrabel will stay and be back. What do you think of Josh Dobbs in his 2-game sample size?
I feel like he's earned the right to compete to be a backup, not a practice squad guy. Like he's played well enough that he can be your number two, and actually, and you can feel good about it. I think if you can get him in, have him in the program for an entire off season, a preseason, get him some reps. Now he's got a particular style that works better. He is a mobile quarterback with a history of taking too long to think, which has led to slow reaction times, and which leads to sacks and turnovers via fumbles. But I like what Dobbs did, and I think as he's matured, I mean, he's been in the league like 5 years now or 6 years now. I think he also is a decent enough backup quarterback. I don't know that you're at the stage, and it may be a function of just not getting the playing time at the NFL level. So I don't think that you want him to start all season for you. But I mean, I don't think he's as good as Jacoby Brissett, but I think he's as good or better than a lot of these backup. I want him over all of the Rams backup quarterbacks except Baker Mayfield, and he's only been there a month. So I wanted him. I'd take him over Bryce Perkins and John Wolford in a heartbeat. Wolford.
Yeah, and I guess a corollary question: do you think Malik Willis is still on the roster next year?
Yeah, I think this is what, year 2?
Would be year 2.
Yeah. To me, it doesn't make sense on a rookie contract, especially. What was he, a third or fourth rounder?
Third round pick, yeah.
So the rookie contract is pretty affordable. There's no reason to get rid of him. You just keep working with him. And you don't want to be in a situation like Green Bay is with Jordan Love, where you have to make the decision on picking up his 5th round option. Well, you don't have to do that with Willis, but they have to make the decision about Love's 5th year option, having seen him play one regular season game. You don't want to be in Tennessee and finishing up year 3 and trying to decide, do we need, is this guy going to be ready for us year 5? What are we doing here? So he has to make, I'd give him 2 more years because admittedly, he's very raw coming in. But if he continues to work hard and do the things he needs to do in the offense, make the right reads, because he's got a good arm, he's very mobile, put an offense around him. I think what'll benefit Malik Willis is having a starter that plays a similar style. Now, Ryan Tannehill is known to be mobile and stuff, so I don't think that's, Tannehill and Dobbs, I think, are not quite as athletic as Willis. They do other things better at this point. But I really like Willis from an athletic standpoint. And we've seen with Justin Fields that athletic profile, and with Lamar Jackson, that athletic Jalen Hurts, that athletic profile can really work well. But you've got to have more than one clear aspect of the game.
I wouldn't be surprised, though. I gathered from the way Mike Vrabel handled everything, he wasn't really a fan. I wouldn't be surprised if they let him go, because it's also not a huge cap hit to you to release somebody, and if they would rather have somebody like Josh Dobbs. And I think it's going to depend, too, if they end up having to retain Tannehill and if they move on from Tannehill. A lot of questions for Tennessee. On the flip side, the Jaguars get to host a playoff game Saturday night in primetime on NBC against the Chargers. How dangerous are they as a playoff team?
The Jaguars, I think, are very dangerous. We've seen them make explosive plays in the passing and running game. So when Trevor is on, they play really well. And Zay Jones and Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram can all put up monster games. And then ETN, it just, I bang on his lateral agility and his true ability as a pass catcher. but when he's in the open field, the dude is fast, and as long as his foot is healthy, I think he can do some damage. It just comes down to Lawrence making the right decisions and getting rid of the ball, not taking sacks, and the defense playing smart. I don't think they're, I'd be surprised if they win more than one game, but there's better than a non-zero chance that they do.
Yeah, I mean, that Chargers defense got shellacked by Latavius Murray and Jerry Jeudy yesterday, and they were playing starters for a long way. So there is a chance for Jacksonville. On to the Sunday games. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers went into Atlanta. They played their starters for a little bit, but definitely not the entire game. And end up losing 30-17 to the Atlanta Falcons. We'll get to the Falcons in a minute, but Buccaneers end up being the only sub-500 team to make it into the playoff field in either conference, going in 8-9, but as a division champion hosting Monday Night Football next week. How do you feel about the Bucs?
The Bucs are going to go as far as Tom Brady wills them. The passing game is productive, and that's what they do. They pass to set up the occasional run. And Chris Godwin and Mike Evans are two of the best wide receivers in the league. And then they piece everything in around it. They call just enough run plays with Fournette and White. They throw the ball just enough to Gage and Otten or Brate, or it was Kyle Rudolph yesterday, but I guess he hurt himself. Sucks getting old.
Telling me.
But I it feels like they're going to scratch and claw to get wins. They're not going to blow anybody out. But they're going to need some Brady magic. They need to be within a score on the last drive of the game, I think, to win. And can it happen? Brady's done it numerous times. I liked watching what he's done on it throughout his career, and you've got to appreciate the competitive fire that he has. But man, dude's getting old.
Yeah. On the other side, Desmond Ridder, we saw 4-game sample size now. He started out a little bit rocky, but he played better last week, played pretty well yesterday, ends up going 2-2. Saw the potential of this young offense. Pretty great day for Drake London to end the season. Tyler Algier ends up over 1,000 yards rushing, has 135 yesterday. How do you feel about Desmond Ridder going forward with Atlanta?
So Atlanta, what do they have? Like the 3rd pick or 4th pick
this year?
Yeah.
Oh, they're way farther back there. They finished 7-10.
Further back?
They're in the top 10, but they're in the back half of the top 10, I believe.
So it feels like then that the best option at quarterback for them in the draft is probably going to be Will Levis. Now, I don't know that Levis is. I haven't watched much Will Levis tape at this point, and some of the people I follow in the Devy community haven't been really high on him. I think Ridder played well enough that he should get a shot. I feel like though they're looking for a veteran to come in and pair with Ridder. Can Ridder hold the veteran off? The whole iron sharpens iron kind of approach. And Mariota just couldn't throw the ball well enough. I think Marcus Mariota retires, if I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I feel like.
Just for clarification, they're pick 8.
Okay. I feel like the writing is on the wall with Mariota. He's gone. I think he signed a 2-year deal, but I don't think he comes back. So I think they bring in a veteran, and I believe they've got the cap space now after this year. They could go get Ryan Tannehill, who I think Arthur Smith would love to have. And I love what Tyler Algier did. I mean, I had some people look at me funny when I said, I think Tyler Algier can get 220 carries this season. He had a little more yardage than I expected.
210 carries, though. You were not far off.
I was right on. But I felt like his yards per carry would have been a little lower, so I didn't think he would get to the 1,000 yards. He only had 3 rushing touchdowns, but he showed well enough in the passing game that if I'm Atlanta, I'm going to bring in a compliment to him, or maybe I keep Cordero Patterson and try to roll him out one more year. But I like what Algier did, and I think him, Ritter, London, and Pitts form a good enough nucleus that you can invest in other places that the team is weaker at. Offensive line, defensive line, anywhere on the defense. It's a situation where they've got to get better, and it's going to take some time, but you have to be smart with your investments there. They need a veteran quarterback. I don't think you just turn it all over to Ritter and say, all right, we're rolling with the rookie, and you bring in somebody, that's not a seasoned veteran to back him up. You have to bring in a veteran out there. I don't know who the veteran is. Is it Taylor Heineke? Is it Case Keenum? Is it, Nathan Peterman, somebody like that? I don't think that a guy like that doesn't really benefit. It doesn't benefit Desmond Ritter, because I think you need a guy that's good enough to push him so that when he wins that job, he knows he won it.
It's time for the annual.
What else were they going to do?
It's time for the annual Carson Wentz migration. You and I were talking about yesterday teams that might try to move up and swap with Chicago, who got the number 1 pick, so they could get a QB. Colts at 4 is not bad. I'm looking at this order here. Raiders are at 7 if they decide they're not going for a veteran. Falcons at 8, Carolina at 9. That Carolina at 9, I could see them, especially if they end up landing kind of a bigger name at coach, trying to move up to grab a quarterback, because they have not had a quarterback for a while.
Yeah.
On to the next game. Buffalo Bills get the 35-23 win over the New England Patriots. Belichick announced he will be back again next season. What do you think he's going to focus on this offseason in retooling the Patriots?
I never thought I would say this, but man, it'd be nice if he went and brought in Bill O'Brien as his offensive coordinator.
I mean, anything's got to be better than the options they had this year, right?
It's crazy. The defense played really well. I think he's going to, keep the defense intact. They're going to lose Damian Harris. Jacoby Myers is a free agent as well. And while they could re-sign Damian Harris, I just don't think they will.
Why?
I think they brought in Harris and Pierre. I forget what his name is, last name, the South Dakota State kid. And so I feel like that he thinks he's got enough running backs that he doesn't need to bring Harris back. They're going to roll out Ramondre Stevenson, and then they'll use those backups. They'll add, I think, a pass catching back. Who knows? It's probably going to be Gio Bernard is who they add in the pass catching role. But they're going to need to do something with the wide receiver. Parker is still signed, but I think Myers is the guy. Tyquan Thornton flashed. So what kind of step can he take from year 1 to year 2? And I think a lot of it will depend on what happens with the offensive coordinator. I hope he doesn't fall prey to we were in it till the end, so let's stick with Patricia and Judge, because that was terrible. And
Bill.
And Zappe, I think, is a credible backup. Mac Jones is a mid-tier quarterback. Jones isn't athletic, doesn't have the best arm, but he kind of like Tom Brady in the fact that he seems like some of the things I've seen, he seems like a fighter. He's like, it looks like he might be kicking asses in the locker room. If you aren't careful, you're like, oh, what's this accountant going to do? And he's grabbing you by the throat and throwing you into the showers. It's like, I want to see.
This is the audio we need to just clip and float out there with no context.
I realize that, that Mac would have probably been a lot better if they had a true alpha wide receiver. The Patriots have not been good at drafting wide receivers. I remember when Shanahan was in Denver and he could not draft a defensive back to save his life. So he traded Clinton Portis for Champ Bailey. And, it's like, if you keep missing on something, well, just fine. It's like, I've made the decision in Dynasty Fantasy Football that I will rarely ever draft a rookie tight end because it usually takes 2 or 3 years. I'll take those lottery tickets on running backs and wide receivers. And then when the tight end starts to show some production, then I'll just trade for him. Then maybe I'm paying a little bit more, but at least I know he's going to do something and he's not going to be riding my taxi squad for 2 or 3 years. So, Bill needs to bring in an alpha wide receiver. I don't think it's Devontae Parker, but he needs to bring in somebody.
I was going to say, most people forgot Devontae Parker is even on the team. And they also splashed out money on Kendrick Bourne, who made a couple of contributions, and Nelson Aguilar, who's another guy I think we forget was even on the team.
But Aguilar is a free agent, so.
Mercifully. Buffalo Bills, so they can't get the 1 seed by virtue of having the no contest. Prior to last Monday night's game, they were going in as the top team in the AFC. They played pretty well yesterday, definitely an emotional time, got a lift from some Nyheim Hines kick returns. Do you still think they're a favorite in the AFC?
Yeah, I was looking at them and I didn't look too close in comparison between them and the Bengals, but them versus Kansas City, their defense is just a little bit better. I know that playing against Patrick Mahomes makes good defenses look not as good, but the Bills have a real good defense. Their offense, I think, is pretty close to on par with Kansas City. Allen runs a little bit more and a little more effectively than Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes will make some throws that Allen doesn't. But Allen has the better wide receiver core. Mahomes has the better tight end. I think the running backs are a wash right now. And so, it's like a 51-49 or 50.5, 49.5 edge that I give the Bills. It's close. There's not I wouldn't say it's a 5% gap, 55-45, which would be 10%, but it's very, very close. It's literally splitting hairs, but I do think they're just a very, very slight favorite.
I think, from an emotional standpoint, because of all that's happened, they'll have a majority of the country kind of rallying around them. They've seemingly become kind of the national team. I still worry about what, the mental toll, all that's going to take on them. I do feel better that they're likely, if and when they meet the Chiefs, it's on a neutral field. I want to see Buffalo do well. It's kind of a shame. They were having like the season we all hoped they would have, and this incident happened, and it makes me a little nervous. I thought we'll get to Cincinnati in a little bit, but I thought they were just okay yesterday. And Buffalo, it was, it's always tough playing a division opponent, but to get 2 kickoff return touchdowns and still have it be a 5-point game late in the fourth quarter is not as encouraging as I was hoping for from Buffalo. Speaking of teams that know how to make their fans feel nervous, the Minnesota Vikings did get the win yesterday, 29-13, but since Nathan Peterman was the starter, was Chicago even trying? Vikings, they won 12 games. They go in as the 3 seed. They get the Giants in the first round. How do we feel about them as contenders?
Nervous. They're paper tigers. When they got tight, they wobbled a bit. I like the weapons they have, and if Dalvin Cook is banged up after this game yesterday, that's going to create some issues. I think I like Alexander Madison, but he's a backup to Dalvin Cook for a reason. And that's because Cook is really, really good. Madison might be good. And Madison might go somewhere and end up being like Michael Turner was after 4 years of backing up LaDainian Tomlinson. And then he went to Atlanta and had a phenomenal career in Atlanta. And that may happen with Alexander Madison after this season. But we just don't know. And we've seen him have some good games and we've seen him have some stinkers. But they've got one of the best tight ends in Minnesota. They've got one of the best wide receiver, the best wide receiver. I'm going to go out on a limb. Their defense has played better. If their offensive line is healthy, I think they have a shot to make it to the NFC Finals. But it's going to be tough. I mean, San Francisco is a phenomenal team. Philadelphia is a phenomenal team. I think whichever one of those they run into, I think gets them. But I do think that the Vikings will get past the Giants.
I think they could get past the Giants. I also, considering it's a 9-7-1 going against the 12-4, this game is closer than it probably ought to be. I still think the Vikings are somewhat of paper tigers, but you're right. I mean, it's tracking for them to have to go to San Francisco in the next round, which would be brutal. I don't know what to make of the Vikings. And in some ways, they did not luck out. There have been a lot of jokes that they need that 1 p.m. Eastern slot,
right?
And they did not get it. And I'm going to laugh if they can't win. I just feel like you're right. They have these incredible pieces on offense, and I don't understand why it's been such a struggle. But I'm like you. I would be nervous. They did get a decent draw, but on the flip side, the Bears sat Justin Fields and got a gift of the number 1 seed. You and I were, or the number 1 overall draft pick. You and I were kind of going back and forth a little bit. What do you think they ought to do?
I think they ought to trade it. But if they can't, then I think they should draft Will Anderson or Jalen. Oh, who's that other big dude? Jalen Carter, I think, from Alabama. But Will Anderson, I think Justin Fields is plenty good. He's an adequate passer. They need help on the offensive line. They need help at wide receiver in allowing them to get a couple more picks that would give them, an offensive lineman and a wide receiver. Or, they traded away that first pick in the second draft. If they could get like a first and 2 seconds or something, and a player that they can plug in and play somewhere, whether they were at the 1 or the 2 spot, it was the same move for them. They should trade back. Let somebody come up and get Young. Let somebody come up and get Stroud. Go back, get more capital, get more really good players to put around your ascending quarterback that has shown that he brings us, can you imagine if Jalen Hurts ran a 4.35? I mean, that's kind of what Justin Fields is. Jalen Hurts was a little better passer coming into the league. I don't think he threw with the anticipation that Fields does, but I think he maybe sees the throws a little bit better than Fields does. And so that kind of that trade-off there. But man, Fields is fast.
I think they have tons of cap and they have tons of picks. I'm with you 100%. You know what? Someone, I threw out a couple earlier, Colts at 4, maybe Panthers at 9. Shit, you never know. The Falcons at 8. One of those, or even somebody that's maybe back in the teens, Tampa Bay, wherever they end up to, somebody is going to want to come up and get a quarterback. I think you trade back. I think it's possible they could get 2 first. And I also think they take that cap space. They need to go get a good veteran wide receiver. Claypool and Mooney are fine guys to have on the team. I like the potential of Kmet. They need a good alpha receiver, and I don't care what Claypool thinks about himself. He's not that.
Right.
On to the next game. Cincinnati Bengals hosted the Baltimore Ravens, got the 27-16 win, which probably relieved the NFL, who now doesn't have to flip a coin to see which of these teams gets to be home this week. They will meet again this weekend for Wild Card Weekend on Sunday Night Football. The Ravens went out there and rolled their third-string quarterback, and were still competitive in this game. But here's the question. Do they need Lamar Jackson to come back to have a chance to advance in the playoffs?
Yes. Yes, they do. I don't know that Jackson's going to be healthy. The fact that they have backed into the playoffs, I know they sat Mark Andrews, and Isaiah Likely did his best Mark Andrews imitation, and it was pretty spot on. They sat J.K. Dobbins, and Kenyon Drake did not do his best J.K. Dobbins imitation. But Anthony Brown completed only about 45% of his passes, and he did 286 yards. So he was hitting some deep passes, but that's just not efficient enough. Didn't get it in the end zone on the passing game at all. And I don't think that Huntley would have been that much better. Those two guys just aren't Lamar Jackson. And it feels to me like Lamar is done in Baltimore, and that if they decide to franchise tag him, he may sit out. It could get super ugly. It almost feels like he's hit the point where he said, look, I told you what I wanted, and you want to play games, and I haven't wavered. That's what I wanted, and now you want to do this, and so I'll just sit.
And there's something like 1-8 without him the last 2 years. So it's not like, hey, we don't need you. I also, if I was Lamar, I'm not sure I want to stay there, because that's another one. I love John Harbaugh as a coach, and I think he's constantly had his team competitive, but almost like the Patriots, it's like they don't know how to build around a quarterback. I mean, they went completely the opposite direction in terms of weapons this year. And I liked Bateman as a pick when it happened, but that hasn't really panned out for them. They have nothing really around him other than Mark Andrews. If I'm Lamar, I might not be too keen about staying there.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if Lamar says, hey, if you have any shot at bringing me back, Roman's got to go.
The Bengals got the win, but they lost Alex Kappa at right guard. They lost the right tackle a couple of weeks ago, so some concerns. And they, like the Bills, they won, and you look at the score, and it was a decent score spread, but it didn't inspire incredible confidence. How are we feeling about the Bengals going into the playoffs?
I think they're going to be fine. I mean, they kind of played down to their competition a little bit. They weren't super productive. Burrow barely broke 215 yards or 200 yards, one touchdown. Mixon was very inefficient, but it was just a game where they kind of just, slugged. Let's get through it is almost what it was. Let's win. We're going to score enough points to win, but let's make sure that, we don't need to put anything special on tape. We're going to run a vanilla offense. We're going to, just kind of take care of business. I saw a little bit of fretting about T. Higgins, his one catch for 7 yards. But when you look at it, he was second on the team in targets with 7. Just didn't convert. I mean, that happens sometimes. We've seen it with Devontae Adams. We've seen it with other wide receivers. There's sometimes, you get 7, 8, 9 targets and you just aren't converting them. Michael Pittman's had games like that. Drake London's had games like that. That's just the way the ball bounces sometimes.
Moving on to the most interesting game of the day, the Texans win 32-31 over the Colts in a game where both teams tried extraordinarily hard for reasons that defy our imagination. Lovie Smith made it a point to come back and get the win. His third on the season cost the Texans the number 1 draft pick. Did it cost him his job?
No. I think the decision was already made that they were moving on from him. And I think that's why. And I think from I don't think the team is necessarily in love with either quarterback. You know, they like both of them a lot, to the point where maybe where they you know, they feel like, look, if we get Stroud or if we get Young, whichever one is there at 2, we're satisfied with that. We think they're both going to be excellent NFL quarterbacks. Now, would you prefer to have your pick of the one, which one? Sure. But you also, you want to do your best to make the guys on your team feel like you're competing. You don't want them to feel like, look, they just told us to roll over and give up. And because these players, they're so competitive. There's so few people that make it to the NFL. Yeah, it involves a lot of talent, but it involves a lot of competitive desire as well. Not just anybody can do it. And to get there and then say, oh, well, we don't want you to play. That's why some people get held out when they're injured, quote unquote. Maybe a little bit dinged up, and they go, oh, we're going to save you for a game. But I could go. No, that's okay. Sit down. But I think, Lovie, just like we felt with David Culley last year, Lovie got the shaft. And I think I don't know if he gets a chance to be a head coach this year, but he's an excellent defensive coordinator. I think he lands on a team that needs a defensive coordinator. And who knows? He may just decide, I'm going to take a couple years because they're paying me. So let me go do a little bit of TV. Let me do a little bit of fishing and some golf and see what's going on. But Lovie kind of got the shaft. Brandon Cooks has already come out and stating he doesn't want to be part of a rebuild at this stage of his career.
The Texans are shaping themselves into an organization that's going to have trouble finding a coach, because I agree with you 100%. I thought they did David Culley dirty last year, and I wasn't a huge fan of the hire, but they definitely, if the Texans are saying they expected something different than what they got this year, they were not honest about the roster they gave.
Well, I think that, getting rid of Easterby was kind of an admission that, hey, we don't think this plan is working. I think Caserio, to me, if I'm ownership there, I'm looking at this guy that's hired two head coaches that were fired after 1 year. And unless I, as the owner, am in on it, I'm like, dude, what the hell? You really expect me to let you hire the next coach too?
Well, because now they're paying 3 coaches at least next year.
They requested permission to interview DeMeco Ryans, and he said, no, I'm good.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if that. Well, also, back-to-back coaches, minority candidates that they hired and then handed a terrible roster over and seemingly blaming them for not being good.
Yeah. Welcome. Congratulations. Here's a shit sandwich. Thank you. This sandwich tastes like shit.
On the Colts side, Zach Moss, got traded midseason, looked to be a chance to maybe start over since he was going nowhere fast in Buffalo. He's looked pretty good displacing Jonathan Taylor, who's on IR. 18 carries, 114 yards and a touchdown, averaged over 6 yards a carry. Granted, Texans' rush defense has been terrible. What do you think? Has Moss done a little bit to improve his standing going into next year?
I think so. Watching him get these opportunities, now I'm curious, like, what was really going on in Buffalo? Like, why could he not rise up and get more opportunity there? Well, he hasn't always looked super efficient. He's looked pretty good by and large. Now, I know they did already re-sign Deion Jackson to a 1-year contract, so they definitely like him. And if Taylor comes back, I think, Moss becomes redundant. And I don't think Jeff Saturday gets the job. It was announced today that Irsay is not doing the hiring of the head coach. Ballard is. Now, I don't know that that's better. But I think it bodes well that it's not going to be Saturday, who did not get along with Jackson. But no, I think Zach Moss
didn't get along with anyone, really.
I'd like to see where he lands next, just to see, Was it Buffalo? Do they just not know how to use a 220-pound running back?
Yeah. On to Miami, where the Dolphins got the 11-6 win over the New York Jets. We'll have plenty of time to pontificate.
That was thrilling.
God. We'll have plenty of time to pontificate about who's going to be the quarterback for the Jets going forward. But Miami makes it into the playoffs as a 7th seed. Tua still hasn't cleared the protocol. Teddy still has a dislocated finger. And they have to go to Buffalo. How do you feel about the Dolphins going into the playoffs?
Shaky. I'd feel better if Teddy makes it back. Now, the finger issue's on his left hand, if I remember correctly. But I'm not expecting a whole lot out of Skylar Thompson. They've got great weapons, but, they may be, to me, I feel like they're a team that's, I don't want to say you want to be satisfied getting into the playoffs, but I feel like with all the injuries they've had at quarterback, it's just a little bit, they've had a good season. It's time to get to work in the off season.
Yeah. I mean, at least Miami made it and didn't have the most epic of collapses. In the other game in the NFC South, the Carolina Panthers and the New Orleans Saints played another riveting game. Panthers won 10-7. Do you think Sam Darnold is going to get a look from somebody after the way he finished?
I think he's going to get a look from somebody because he's probably one of, I think he's one of the top 35 quarterbacks in the NFL right now. Maybe 25. So at that bottom end, I mean, they're just, once you get past, 16, 17, 18, it gets pretty shaky at the quarterback position. And I think Darnold has enough. He's got the tools. He's got a good arm. He's a good athlete. So somebody, I'm not sure where he fits right now. I kind of look at it over the offseason and see, but I feel like he should get an opportunity to go somewhere and compete. And then even if he doesn't get the job, the team should feel good that if something happens, they've got a decent quarterback to step in. Because there are some teams this year we saw, they just didn't have anything behind the starter. And once the starter went down, it just fell apart.
Yeah, Darnold and ironically Baker, after what he did with the Rams, are two guys where, you were talking about if Atlanta went a certain way, bringing in a veteran that might push Ritter or at least gives them an option. I could see them landing there. On to Pittsburgh, where the Steelers did what they needed to do. They got the 28-14 win over the Browns. They were unfortunate to see the Dolphins get that late field goal that prevented them from getting in. Mike Tomlin pulls it out, 9-8, has never had a losing season. Where does he rank for you among all-time coaches?
I think he's up there. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't have a ranking of coaches in order, but I mean, he's I think he's going to go to the Hall of Fame when he retires. What is he now? His 9th, 10th, 11th year, something like that? Maybe even more.
I think it's been longer than that. I think they said it was over 15 years since Cowher retired. It's been 15 years because they made a big deal about it on PTI.
All right. So it's, 15 years without a losing season on the same team. What's he won? 2 Super Bowls? 1 Super Bowl?
Yep, 2. I'm pretty sure 2 because Ben won 2.
And he's a no BS kind of guy too. So I like him as a coach. I hate that he coaches the Steelers. But the Steelers to me, the Steelers are an organization that every team should want to emulate when it comes to stability from the top down.
We'll move on to Denver, where the Broncos posted the season-high 31 points and actually looked like Jerry Jeudy was part of their game plan for once. But let's talk about the team they were playing. The Chargers score 28 and lose. Brandon Staley taking quite a bit of heat today for playing his starters for a lot of the game, though he had literally nothing to gain from it. in a game where we saw Mike Williams suffer an injury that may keep him out of the playoffs. Did Brandon Staley make a mistake?
It's in hindsight, it's easy to look back and say that it was a mistake. But how often have we seen teams rest players, rest a lot of players, and they come out in the playoffs and they're just flat? It's a fine line to walk, and it's only bad if somebody gets dinged up like Williams does. It's only bad if the team rests a bunch of players and then they come out flat and lose. It's going to be we're going to have to look at it next week to see really how bad was it. And then we have to be realistic enough to say that, looking forward, it's hard. You have to make the decision based on what you feel is best. Mike Williams missed a lot of games this year. Getting him more playing time, I don't think was a bad idea. But, he got hit in the back and he's bruised. All the x-rays have been negative. All the MRIs have been negative. He's bruised. Now it comes down to how long is it going to take him to recover from being bruised? Hopefully he's back this week.
Yeah, it was not actually the Williams injury, if you were watching the game, that finally spooked Staley into pulling all the stars. Joey Bosa looked for a little bit like he tweaked his core muscle again. And they were just tearing into him in the broadcast. I was kind of laughing a little bit. But this morning on NFL Network Radio, they suggested if the Chargers go out and look flat and get blown out in the first round, that the way he's handled things could cost Staley his job, which is... he was on the hot seat, so... people
have gotten fired for less.
That's true. On to San Francisco. 49ers get Elijah Mitchell back. He scores a couple touchdowns. Case of the rich getting richer, of course. Brock Purdy finishes 5-0 as a starter in the season. The 49ers are the number 2 seed and awaiting the Seahawks. Meanwhile, the Cardinals, who lost that game 38-13, fall off a cliff. Kingsbury is no more. Kyler Murray likely not back until late October if you're optimistic, after Thanksgiving if you're realistic. What do you think happens with the Cardinals here this offseason?
I think so. They lost their GM too. I know he stepped away.
He's not. You're right. He permanently resigned.
And today he's like, "No, really, I'm done." So and then the owner was like, "Well, we want to hire the GM first, but maybe the coach first. Just we'll see."
I also like T. Waffle. He's like, we may have Kyler Murray help us pick a coach, right, but you know what? He's not really the deciding factor, bro.
It looks, to be honest, it looks and sounds like a complete and utter train wreck. So you might as well let Kyler drive.
I mean, I think it is a complete and utter train wreck. There was a lot of discussion. This is going to be an interesting offseason. JJ retired, so he made that decision for him. I would be shocked if they don't move DeAndre Hopkins, and if Ertz doesn't retire, I think they move him too. I think they're gonna be looking at turning the roster over, because I don't think Kyler Murray's back before December.
But if Kyler is playing a part in the decisions, is he really going to go, well, we should get rid of my best wide receiver and our best tight end?
I mean, they'll still have Marquise Brown. I don't think they move on from Hollywood. And they still have Rondale Moore. And honestly, I don't think DeAndre Hopkins wants to stay there.
Each other, you've got almost a DeAndre Hopkins.
On to Philadelphia, where the Eagles, despite playing complete backups from the Giants, were barely able to hold on to a 22-16 win, but they got a win, and they are your number 1 seed. Dennis, do you think Brian Daboll for the Giants is the coach of the year?
He's as good a candidate as anybody else out there. What he did with the Giants, getting them into the playoffs. He should get strong consideration just for the fact that he got Kenny Golladay a touchdown yesterday.
Actually, that should be a mark against him, because the fantasy season's finally over, and now Kenny Golladay gets a touchdown.
Yeah, but nobody's been playing Golladay, so it's better that the fantasy season is over when he gets it. he made chicken salad out of chicken feathers with that wide receiver core, and he's found a couple pieces that I think they should keep going forward. And they're another team, like when Wan'Dale Robinson gets healthy, keep Darius Slayton as your field stretcher. Hodgins is your other outside wide receiver too, and then bring in a true alpha wide receiver like Chicago needs. Now I hear they grow on trees, but they need to get that. Bring Barkley back. Daniel Jones looked great. Their offensive line has started to gel. Thibodeau and Ojulari and these guys on defense are playing really, really well and bringing in a lot. I mean, he should definitely be in the conversation on the short list for Coach of the Year.
Yeah. On the flip side, Jalen Hurts probably will be and should be the NFL MVP for what he did during the season, but he missed a couple of games with that shoulder injury. Didn't look great yesterday. 20 of 35, 229, no touchdowns and interception. Only ran 9 times. They probably wish he had run no times, but only got 13 yards. Any concerns about him? He gets a bye week here, but then you're going to be playing playoff football. Any concerns about Hurts?
No, I think if he felt good enough to go out and play yesterday, I think he's going to be fine. 2 more weeks now of rest. The shoulder is going to get better. So the biggest concern I probably have is rust, playing 1 game in 5 weeks. So that's probably going to be the biggest issue. But I mean, A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith have had phenomenal years. Miles Sanders rushed for over 1,200 yards. They've got weapons.
They might get to see the Giants again too.
And yeah, so their defense has been phenomenal. Their Darius Slay and I forget who the other cornerback was. But man, their they've played good all around, and they earned the number 1 seed. I'm down. Let Jalen get some rest. Give him the MVP, and let's see what happens in 2 weeks.
I'm not winning any favors with Vikings fans. They just put together that I was making a joke about them losing this weekend. On to a game that gave me grave concerns for the playoffs because of my not-so-closeted Dallas Cowboy homerism. The Washington Commanders get the 26-6 win over Dallas, despite the fact that it sure seemed like Dallas played their starters in a game that actually had some kind of consequences for them. Let's start with Dallas. They're going to Tampa Bay on Monday night. They've already lost in Tampa Bay to Tom Brady once this actual NFL season. With the kind of shoddy stretch of football they put together at the end of the year, should we be concerned about them being a legitimate contender?
You can't have Dak Prescott completing 37% of his passes, that's for sure. It was a weird game from that. I mean, he's usually pretty efficient. Pollard didn't have an efficient game. Usually you can count on Pollard to bring explosive plays in the running and passing game and Zeke to kind of grind it out. Neither one of Zeke was 1.3 yards per carry against the Commanders. Now, I know the Commanders just got Chase Young back, and that helps any defense. But they only threw it 19 times with Sam Howell. Jarrett Patterson was their leading rusher. So it's Dallas. I am concerned about Dallas because you don't just take a week off while you're playing and feel like, oh, well, we can just turn it back on next week. So there's going to be definitely some concern for Cowboys fans when they roll out there next week.
I mean, Dak threw 37 times. He was in a majority of the game. I think it's concerning. On the flip side, we got to see Sam Howell, 5th-round draft pick, kind of slid in the draft. We wondered if he'd get a shot. Finally, seemed like Ron Rivera remembered he was on the roster, let him roll out there. You mentioned it, 11-19, 169 yards, TD, an interception, 5 carries, 35 yards, and a touchdown. Small sample size, but Dallas has a somewhat decent defense, or did at one time. What did you think of what you saw from Sam Howell?
Yeah, I thought he looked okay. I think that, there's no substitute for actual playing time. And I know that this was Howell's first game. They only let him throw it 19 times. For whatever reason, Dallas just seemed like they laid down. Jarrett Patterson was the leading rusher. Did they rest Robinson, or was he out with an injury?
I was wondering that same thing. He's not in the box score, so he didn't play. I assume he had an injury because I don't know why you would have just rested him.
Because Gibson's on IR. So, but Howell, 5 carries for 35 yards. He did have an interception, but he got the ball where it needed to be. McLaurin led him in targets. Dotson was second. And Logan Thomas, the tight end, was third. So 13 of 19 targets went to those 3 guys. I think that Howell has to play more before you can really make a decision. I feel like Rivera is probably going to be safe this offseason, but if he gets canned, I won't say I'm particularly surprised.
I think he is safe mostly because of their ownership situation being in flux. And you know what? This is his new career high as Commanders head coach. Gets to 8 wins, got past that 7-win hurdle. On to the game that probably broke both our hearts. The Los Angeles Rams took the Seahawks to overtime before losing 19-16. A lot of rumors swirling. Do you think this is it for Sean McVay?
The rumors are saying yes. And if it is, I think that's weak. I think it's soft because so what I've seen is that it's not because of burnout. It's that he just doesn't feel like doing the rebuild. And I'm like, wait a minute. That seems crazy. Why would you, it's, I don't know. I would lose. If that's the case, I'm going to ask Bruning to dye his hair.
Oh no. Yeah.
Maybe
part of me just
instead of
part of me just
different, so he doesn't look like him.
I know we essentially saw this from Sean Payton last year, but part of me just with as much of a competitor as McVay is, I'm torn between the reports that he's kind of burned out and that some of the things that have happened in his personal life are taking a toll on him and he needs time away. But it just seems weird as a competitor that he'd want to go out. It's kind of a dubious distinction to be the reigning Super Bowl champion that posted the lowest win total. I just don't know if he wants to go out that way. I feel the same way about Aaron Donald, but I guess those guys were pretty close to walking away last year, and maybe it happens.
Well, Donald, I'm not surprised by. He'd be going into his 10th year, I think. He plays defensive tackle. He's undersized. He takes a beating. So Donald, it makes sense to me. He ended it with an injury. It makes sense. But McVay to just basically say, you know what? I'm the dynasty owner that's traded away all my picks and good players. Peace. I'm out.
So now that they've officially made the playoffs, Geno Smith is the quarterback of the Seahawks in 2023, yes or no?
So he's a free agent, and he's already said he's planning to test the market. Now, I feel like he's got to say that to get his
build up his value.
Yep, he's got to say that. But if I'm him, it's like, why do I want to go somewhere else? What am I? There's DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Kenneth Walker and Noah Fant are not somewhere else. And I've got a rapport with them. I don't know that he signs a 5-year deal, but I think a 2 years with an option, because he's 33 years old, I think. 3 years maybe. But if somebody throws, quarterbacks are hard to come by. And so I could see somebody throwing a ton of money at him. My gut tells me that he's going to go back to Seattle, but he could be the guy they bring in Atlanta.
Yeah. I ultimately think he ends up back in Seattle. It was a good story. I think they make it work. The last game of the regular season, the Detroit Lions go into Green Bay and sweep the Packers, knock them out of the playoffs, finish 9-8, get the 20-16 victory. Dennis, they started 1-6, they finished 9-8. How pumped are you for the 2023 Detroit Lions?
So I'm very excited, but you know how it is when you have a team that you feel is taking the right steps, and then they overachieve, and they're a year early, and they just it all comes together, and they just don't quite get there. And you're like, man, next year is going to be great, and next year they just fall apart. Do I think that DeAndre Swift could be more of a train wreck with injuries and time missed, and the wide receivers? Probably not. But could Jared Goff revert to happy feet in Mr. Interception? He could. The defense still has significant progress to make. I want to believe, and I'm going to believe. I want to see, Jamal Williams as a free agent. What happens there? There's a lot of moving parts, and I like where now I'll be the first to admit I didn't like the Dan Campbell hire. I thought that he was too rah-rah, too much of a bro, that it would not play for very long. But the team is playing hard for him, and by and large, he's making the right decisions. He made the tough call to fire a defensive coach mid-season, and the defense started playing better. If he loses Ben Johnson this offseason, that's going to be tough. I don't know. I haven't looked deeply at what the depth of the coaching staff is, and what my luck, he's going to fucking bring in Cliff Kingsbury to be the OC.
Don't say hurtful things.
And so I'm going to hold on to. They're ready to take that next step, but I'm going to prepare for them to just fall apart. Hope for the best, expect the worst. Prepare for the worst.
I mean, I get it. I really do hope they bring back Jamal Williams this offseason, not only for what he did on the field, but for the great presence he seems to be with that team. But, I thought the Lions had a good outside chance making the playoffs this year. They came darn close. I think they make it next year. I'm excited to see them keep going. On the other side, the Packers kind of wilted away. Very interesting. I don't know if you caught it at the end of the game. Jameson Williams came and asked about doing a jersey swap with Rodgers. He said he was going to hang on to this one. Rodgers and Randall Cobb kind of walking off pretty somberly at the end of that. Rodgers, last game as a Packer?
Well, the Packers have to make a decision on Jordan Love. So are they going to keep him or extend him to that fifth-year rookie option? I think yes, because you haven't had a chance. And even if you think Rodgers is coming back, well, then you've got another year, a fifth year with Love to see, is it going to work? And if it does, then you can sign him to an extension, or you can franchise tag him. You can play that dance like Washington did with Kirk Cousins. Rodgers looked like he was done walking off the field, but he's one of the biggest competitors in the NFL. And I don't know if he can go out that way. And I don't know if he wants to go somewhere else. I know he's had a sometimes contentious relationship with the front office, but it doesn't. How often does a late 30s quarterback leave the only team he's ever been with and go somewhere and win a Super Bowl? It's happened once? a couple of years ago, you know, it isn't an easy thing to do. So I think it's 50-50 whether he comes back. He's going to go off to the mountains and he's going to do some acid and he's going to hang out and try and find himself. You know, he's got himself another girlfriend that they're dating casually. Wouldn't surprise me to, you know, see him get engaged again. It seems like that's his thing. He finds a new girl and gets engaged every other off season or something. But, you know, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in the game for a long time. He's exciting. And, you know, all the rookies they have are going to be second-year players, and the opportunity to continue to grow with them and see, you know, Dobbs and Watson, they bring a lot to the table. And so that may intrigue him. Aaron Jones is still signed. A.J. Dillon isn't a free agent. So they've got, you know, I think Bakhtiari may be getting to the end. I think he's just breaking down. So they do need help on the O-line. But I think he's back in Green Bay next year. But it's a very slim margin, kind of like that is Buffalo the favorite. It's like a 51-49. It could teeter either way.
I think Aaron Rodgers retires this offseason. There was a very, and I know we had that a couple of years ago, and then that ended up being, you know, misleading, where it seemed like he was real close to retiring in the press conference after a playoff loss. But I think this season took a lot out of him, and I think he's ready to go. But I guess we will see. It's always an adventure, you know, with Aaron Rodgers.
Who are you pulling for in the game tonight? TCU or Georgia?
I guess a tie, because I can't root for both of them to lose. Nothing
TCU.
Nothing in my life would let me pull for a Texas team outside of the Cowboys. So I guess Georgia. What a Sophie's choice. And on that cheery note, Dennis, Matt, and I will be back on Friday with a super wild card weekend preview. And until then, Dennis, if people like me are a little agnostic about tonight's matchup, what should they do with all their newfound free time?
They should subscribe and download the podcast. Listen to it on your favorite podcast app. Give us a rating and a review. Helps us out a lot. Go visit the other great podcasts on the Pigskin Podcast Network.
Somewhere in an alternate universe,